Now, if you only know C.S. Lewis from the Chronicles of Narnia, and maybe you've watched some of those films or something like that, you really don't know that much about. If that's the only thing you know C.S. Lewis by, that you really don't know much about him yet. Those are his most famous works, but by no means all of his works. He wrote 7 volumes to the Chronicles of Narnia, and they're somewhat insightful to the man as far as his thinking on some subjects. But he wrote a lot of other books. In fact, on the fiction side, one that people don't know about very often is his space trilogy. His space trilogy he calls it a fantasy novel for adults, but I think it's a fascinating set of books, and he explores all sorts of topics. And so the space trilogy, if you're looking for fiction, his space trilogy is also quite good. But I want to talk a little bit today about some of his nonfiction works. Where should you start? And obviously his most famous one is Mere Christianity. And so Mere Christianity is a classic now, and it is still so relevant. In Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis makes an argument for Christianity primarily based on the moral argument. So he argues that we as humans apprehend moral law, right? We feel some sort of moral oughtness. We ought to do this. We ought not to do that. We have this sense of fairness. It's all innate. And he makes an argument from morality that God exists. This is so relevant today because our culture wants to have all of wants to retain so many ideas of morality. In fact, invent new morality as well. But they do it without any foundation. So they want to make all sorts of moral claims and have no foundation for those moral claims. C.S. Lewis challenges that in Mere Christianity, and it's influenced thousands and thousands of people. So Mere Christianity is a great place to start. It's a good introduction to C.S. Lewis's thoughts, and at least in regards to how he thought about the moral argument. So that's a good place to start. One of the books that is forgotten, that a lot of people overlook, is his book Miracles. And you might look at that book Miracles and think, well, okay, this might be a series of Lewis is going to talk about a series of miracles that he's going to try to prove or something like that. No, what C.S. Lewis does is he goes down to the heart of the matter and attacks materialistic naturalism. So he makes an argument that naturalism or materialism is self-defeating, and he does this based on an argument from reason. And so this will take you a little bit of time to digest. There's some paragraphs in there that you'll want to go over more than once, when he lays out a case that rationality itself doesn't get off the ground in a naturalistic, materialistic framework. So this is a book that I would highly recommend. One of his other books that he wrote, which kind of goes along this similar theme, he addresses one of the greatest barriers that people have in faith, and that is the fact if God is all good and God is all loving, why is there so much pain and suffering? This isn't necessarily one of my favorite books of Lewis's. He does say in this book that he's not trying to present anything that's brand new, but rather he is trying to bring together some of the thought of theologians of the past, but he does it in a very eloquent way. So this is not a waste of time, but I wouldn't say it's one of my very favorite books of C.S. Lewis. Now, I did tell you that I was going to focus mostly on his nonfiction, but I will give a mention to this book, The Screwtape Letters. In this, there is a a fictitious demon who's writing to his uncle on tips how to tempt somebody. So, ironically, this is almost a little bit of a devotional book because Lewis uses this as a kind of a prop to explore our vulnerabilities of humans and where we're weak and where we can be attacked by the enemy. And so this is a interesting and fun book, and also can have some devotional qualities. It exposes some of the weaknesses that we as Christians face. Now, honorable mention is this book, A Grief Observed. C.S. Lewis, I think, originally wrote that book anonymously, but he writes it after his wife Joy. He'd only been married to her for a few years, had experienced a devastating fight with cancer, which ultimately led to her demise. And this is Lewis as real and raw as it gets. He's wrestling with all these feelings and hurt and trying to reconcile himself to why God allowed this. What's interesting is that when you compare the problem of pain with a grief observed. So he's not experiencing physical pain here, but he's experiencing emotional pain. So it's one thing to deal with it on an intellectual level. It's another one it's on a whole nother level when you're dealing with pain, whether it's physical or emotional, on a very not an intellectual level, but on that emotional level. So this gives a glimpse into the man there. The last one I'll mention today is this one, God in the Dock. So God in the Dock is so ahead of its time. Although C.S. Lewis was facing some of the things that we're facing in popular culture, back in the 50s and 40s, it's really entered mainstream culture now. And so this book is still highly relevant. In fact, I see so many internet atheists that a good dose of C.S. Lewis would help them through some of their major objections against Christianity. Now, all that being said, C.S. Lewis was not what we call a conservative Christian. And there are some things that I would highly disagree with C.S. Lewis. But, when you're eating a chicken, sometimes you have to discard the bones. And there's some things in C.S. Lewis that you need to just throw out. That's not right, that's not correct, that's wrong. But there's also some really good things and some really good insights that he has. And so for that reason, I think he has quite a few books that are out there that are worth reading, worth spending some time with. Many of these are in audiobooks now, so if you prefer audio, you can listen to them rather than read them. But whether you listen or whether you read, many of these books are well worth your time. So that's all I got for you today. I'll look forward to seeing you on the next video.